Hey class, welcome back to EDUC 32233. Sorry, I struggle with that. It's just one of those things. The faster I say it, the harder it is. So, anyways, welcome back. This is our last sort of topic for the semester. We are on our second of three lectures, kind of on development of knowledge. We talked about declarative knowledge last time. Now we're going to look at procedural knowledge, like the knowledge of how we do stuff. I mean, think about all the different procedures that might be we've learned over the years. Learning how to tie your shoes early on as a child, and then maybe going into teenage years, you're learning how to drive a car, things like that. That's what I mean by procedures. Those are things that you do. They're verbs, if that helps. So just some background and context information. The theory that we're going to be working from to understand the development of procedural knowledge comes from Anderson's act star theory. And the idea behind this theory is that we go through different stages of internalizing that procedural knowledge, getting it into our memory, and to be able to use later on, learning how to perform the procedure. So that'll be the main focus theoretically. And it's kind of looking at, again, remember we have our memory cognitive system is, again, we break it up into either declarative or procedural knowledge. Now, I know we're talking about those two things in a vacuum, but there's very much a lot of overlap between them. I mean, think about you have to have the declarative knowledge in order to perform certain procedures, or really any procedure, I suppose. So it might be helpful for you yourself. Think about this question that's posed below. What are some examples of your own procedural knowledge and or procedural knowledge more broadly? Think about some things that, maybe skills that you've learned over the years, maybe that are unique to you, or maybe that are, pretty common amongst folks. So stage one, our first stage, this is called the cognitive or declarative stage, and this is really where you're learning what the declarative knowledge is. It's first applied. So when you're learning how to drive a car, for example, that procedure, learning that pretty complex procedure of driving a car, you need to know the declarative knowledge about the different parts of the car. For example, you need to know what the steering wheel is in order to, move the steering wheel. You need to know what the brake and the brake and gas pedal. If you use a automatic transmission, you don't have to worry about shifting. But if you are using a manual transmission, you got to understand what that means. So really, you're learning the procedure, but you're also learning all the lingo, all the important stuff that goes with it. And at this stage, in terms of learning, it tends to be slower. It tends to be more challenging because you're kind of adding in an extra layer of stuff there by learning the declarative items. And this is we're going to move those into working memory. Declarative learning, we're going to call that into working memory. So just a reminder, I think we touched on this previously in the semester, but this is just a model of how memories are formed. We get input from our environment. If we pay attention to that initially it goes to our sensory memory. If we don't paying attention to it, it's lost. If we start paying attention to it, we can actually mentally manipulate and think about and play with the information. And so that's kind of what you're doing. You're in this middle stage here, but ideally we want to keep it with enough processing. We want to get it to move into long term. That way we can pull it back out and use for later. Stage two is called the procedural or associative stage. This is when you've had enough practice. You have enough practice. You kind of embodied that relevant declarative knowledge. So the learning is going to take place a little bit faster here. You're not so caught up in what the definitions are, things like that. Another example is, like, think about like playing a board game or a card game. That very first time you play it, a lot of the times the most challenging aspect is like the rules, like learning how to play the rules itself. And then maybe that seconds, maybe afterwards with enough practice, you just play it. So it's kind of what's happening. It's kind of what's happening here in the second stage. We've learned all the rules, maybe for driving a car, we know what the gas pedal does, we know what the brake does, we know how to use the steering wheel, things like that. And now we can really just focus more so on the procedure and getting some practice in. So yeah, at this point, we're now moving into stage three, which is the autonomous stage or tuning productions. This is where things become, you have practiced this enough times, you really don't have to think about it. So stage one and stage two require a much larger degree of cognitive effort. But when we get to this third stage of learning, we're able to sort of embody the learning. This is where we get into that stage of what some people refer to as muscle memory. Like, you've done a procedure so many times that you don't even have to think about it. And many of you, I keep using the example of driving, but think back to the first time you drove a car, and there's all kinds of things happening. You're having to keep track of so many different variables. You're probably nervous. I mean, there's all things going on that might be kind of overwhelming cognitively. But by the time you get to this third stage, you can get in a car, start it up, drive somewhere, and you may not even necessarily remember everything that happened in between. You can kind of just go on autopilot. So, and really the important part of this is practice, 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 practice. When learning new procedures, you have to allot yourself time for practice. And think about that if you're teaching students, whether you're a parent, whether you're a teacher, you're working with kids, practice, practice, practice. It goes back to that saying, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. So that's kind of what we're talking about here is, in order to move through these different stages, you're going to do a lot of work initially at first, practice at stage two, and then stage three, it kind of becomes more automatic. So just kind of think about that in terms of your own procedures you've learned, or if you're going to be teaching people procedures. That's one of the primary theories in ed psych that we use to understand how that learning takes place. So that's going to be it for this section. We have one more lecture to go, and then we're done, folks. So thanks for sticking around. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye.